Good morning. I was asked to look at this video that Robert Baker put out about his heritage, and most of what he says is fine. He's obsessed with this idea of seeing his great-great-grandparents in heaven and stuff like that. But to show you, he's a section, he's obsessed with the Civil War. He's obsessed with it. I'm going to show you the clip here, and he's going to talk about, well, the guy's son gets killed because he doesn't, the guy gets shot thinking the rifle wasn't loaded. And after that, when they bury him, there's a great revival that breaks out. And Robert gets very emotional about that, and gives the idea that people need to get saved, and that's all fine. Nothing wrong with that. But why does he keep talking about he talks about the Antifa, and he says abolitionists. Antifa is an abolitionist. There's a deep-seated hatred that is in this guy. But that's really the issue. Why do you keep bringing up the Union? He said the Union came and burned all the Aryan temple. It had nothing to do with the son that kid's death. Nothing. The northern aggression. God often uses tragedy in a person's life to bring out. Ecclesiastes says it's better to go to the let's see what it says here. Ecclesiastes 7. The house of mourning rather than the house of mirth. Ecclesiastes 7. Ecclesiastes 7:2. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting. For that is the end of all men, and the living will lay it to his heart. So it's better to actually go to a funeral than it is to a party. Why? Because the party isn't reality. The funeral is. You're going to die. And if the party, we'll have your party, and that's a moment in time. So he makes the point through this and the idea that, this led to a great revival, and that's all wonderful. The Civil War had a lot of great revivals going on because of the suffering. And Lincoln was talking about that. Lincoln told him in the Second World War. He said, why is this war going on so long? And it was to bring about, the Lord said he couldn't understand the mysterious ways of the Lord. There was a reason for it. There's something, when you keep dwelling on a group of people, the Union, it's like this hatred that is so deep-seated. You say, what is this guy? This guy's a problem. See here. So, about 43 minutes in.
Which are very interesting, of when he started the church.
We had no problem with the South. We had no problem with the Confederacy people. This only cuts one way. This hatred comes from one side, not from that. It doesn't go back. We don't have no concern with the Confederacy. The war's over. It's done. We don't keep bringing it up. This guy can't let it go.
Church in Brooksville. There was actually two different Baptist churches in Brooksville, and he came in and said, let's unite the two together, and they united as Union Baptist Church. And he took over as pastor of Union Baptist Church, and he had I guess you could say they had white service and they had black service. And in those days, that wasn't uncommon. But he really, really cared about black people, just like my third great-grandfather.
See, everybody in his family cared for black people. You notice that? He's saying many Baptists thought black people had no souls, but his family was the exception.
In fact, he eventually, later after the Civil War, resigned and was only a pastor of the whole black church, which I thought was amazing. So it's amazing to me how awesome this is. They weren't racist. You hear all this garbage nowadays. Oh, Southern people are racist. Yeah, well,
no one said that. Who's ever said that? All Southern people are racist. No one said that. Stuff that comes out of his mouth is just stupid.
How come they care about black people and want to be their pastors and want to see them get saved and things like that?
Well, how come they would keep keeping them in slavery, Robert? How come they were making them second-class citizens during the Jim Crow laws, Robert? All right? Don't avoid the issue. You were keeping 3 million people enslaved when you said in your other video you would never want anybody to be held against their will. in your video on slavery. Well, that's what you were doing with 3 million people in the South. So stop playing word games.
Well, James Henry Breaker was pastor down there when the Civil War broke out. And the Civil War broke out, and when it did, they said, well, we got to defend our state. We've got to defend our country.
No, the country is the United States of America. That was your country.
And James Henry Breaker...
You got to defend the Constitution. He's going to defend the Confederate Constitution, which should allow the expansion of Negro slavery in the Constitution, people. Let's keep him in mind when he's not telling you. The Constitution that they were fighting for allowed the expansion of Negro slavery. Not just slavery, Negro slavery. But he loved black people. yeah, he didn't mind him being in slavery.
He became the captain of what he called the Old Guard Mounted Rangers. And he was the captain. Many of the people in his little militia group were church members. And so James Henry Breaker and his church members were militia of the Old Guard. They called themselves the Wildcats, which I thought was cool. And they were going around. And by the way, not shortly before that were the Seminole Wars. And it was very common in that time that the Seminole Indians would come and kill white people and burn.
You know what the Seminole Wars were being fought over? The blacks were fleeing there and becoming free blacks. And they were fighting with the Seminole Indians against the Southerners. They had to have fought. And Andrew Jackson went and destroyed it. The Seminole Indians would welcome blacks. And they would fight alongside the Seminole Indians.
Burn down their houses. And so he lived during that time, and he saw that. And he saw people's homes being burned and people killed by the Indians. And then not even 20 years later, here comes the Union Army. And it says here in these things here that the Union Army came down to the Tampa area, got off the boat, went in, and burned a 40-mile radius of everything in their path. Just burned it all down. Now you tell me.
Why are you talking about something happened 150 years ago? What's the matter with this guy? What is the matter with this guy?
How is that not a war crime?
Oh, the Confederacy never committed war crimes, Robert. The Confederacy never did anything wrong. You want to read war crimes? There's a German colony up in Texas that was wiped out. Because they were against the Confederacy. They were against slavery. So don't tell me about the idea, well, no war crimes. This guy has such a warped sense of history that it's unbelievable. And he keeps bringing it up because he has hate in his heart, people. Don't buy the idea he gets all emotional at the end. This guy is walking around with hatred in his heart.
The Unions, the United States Army, just come in and just burn everything to the ground. And then
well, you guys didn't do anything.
They left.
Yeah, they left.
And James Henry Breaker was out there in the woods with his mounted rangers. And it's just an amazing story how he was a Confederate and he fought in that war. But something happened. And it was just, this is where it all comes down to, okay?
So he's getting very emotional. What happens is that the young man, the son of the man he's talking about, gets shot accidentally because the guy walks in there and they're kidding around with these guns. And it happens quite often, the young men. They will point guns at each other and pull the trigger, not realizing the gun is loaded. You always assume a gun is loaded, people. Unless you check it. Never point a gun at somebody. That's one thing. You never point a gun at a weapon at anybody unless you plan to shoot them. That's one principle. So these are things you learn in the Marine Corps. What's one thing? You don't point a gun unless somebody, unless you plan to shoot them. Second thing is, you always assume a weapon's loaded until you check it. That's just basic firearm common sense. A lot of people, boy, they're terrible with this stuff. A weapon is a dangerous thing. You got to be very careful with it. So this young man was killed, unfortunately, because the other guy didn't know the musket was loaded, or what weapon he was using, and he shot him accidentally. That happens quite often. You'd be surprised. So those two principles you use always to keep you safe in a firearm. Never point a firearm at anybody unless you plan to shoot them. And always assume a weapon is loaded until you check it. You check it. And so that's 2 point. That's those are things that keep you safe. Around firearms. So, but anyway, the whole point is that look, the whole thing, and he gets very emotional at the end, which is fine. He talks about people getting saved, revival, and stuff, and the death he preached. The guy preached the sermon, of his death of his son. A lot of revivals. Lincoln was talking about in the Second World War, why was this war continuing so long? Neither side expected it to last long. There were many revivals in the war. God will take of something bad and take something good, but the hatred. Where does this hatred come? That he keeps talking about the Union, and he links the Antifa. He makes a comment in there, the Antifa with the abolitionists. Okay, the abolitionists were not Antifa. So, while he talks about the gospel and getting people saved, and he wants to redefine what slavery is, and slavery is really just like some voluntary thing, but he'll say in his video on slavery that he's against any, forcing any man against his will to do anything. Yet that's exactly what the Confederacy was doing. Confederacy had in their Constitution the expansion that the Negro slavery was going to be allowed to expand anywhere. It wasn't slavery in general, like the Bible teaches. It was a particular race being enslaved. That's why Robert keeps bringing up the idea of his family, loved black people, which is probably true. That's fine. But many people didn't. Many people didn't. But this guy has an intense hatred. Let it go, Robert. Let it go. It's like us still being angry at the Japanese and Germans. You got to let it go. And that was a lot closer than we are here at the Civil War. And the fact of the matter is that, people can argue back and forth with history and stuff like that, but this guy makes it an issue of, pure hatred. And if you don't believe me, go read. He has the Confederate Baptist in the beginning of the video. He talks about the Confederate Baptist. He has it on his first website. And go read what he talks about the Union. They're all Universalists, abolition, Unitarians and Catholics. And just pure hate. Pure hate. So the fact is that the Confederates on the wrong side of history. Period. You can talk about all you want, but they were on the wrong side of history. Slavery had to be ended. Period. He talks about he wouldn't want to be a slave. He want to keep slaves. Well, thanks to Lincoln, you don't have to worry about it. Okay? Thanks to Lincoln. Because of Lincoln, you don't have to worry about that. So let's stop and put this up. Amen. Thank you.